Before you settle into your bed tonight, I want you to do something simple but powerful. Turn off your lights and let the room fall into complete darkness. Take a moment to feel the quiet around you. Now, as you lie back, open your eyes and look into the black screen in front of you. Let it become a doorway into the unknown. In the stillness, you'll find a world waiting for you, a world where light is a distant memory and darkness holds the answers. Take a deep breath and let go of everything around you. You're about to step into a place where the only thing that matters is what you can't see. Look into the black screen. Let it consume you. Let it follow you into sleep. And remember, it's not just a screen. It's a doorway. Let's begin.
The drive out of New Orleans was silent. Elias's car sped down the dark, empty highway, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. Charlie sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her fingers drumming anxiously on the armrest. Her thoughts raced as she tried to piece together everything Elias had told her. "So," she began, breaking the silence. "You've been tracking the mansion for years. Why didn't you try to stop it before?" Elias glanced at her, his expression grim. "Because no one survives the mansion. Not for long, anyway. You're the first to escape with your soul intact." Charlie shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "And now I've somehow made things worse." Elias's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not worse. Just different. When you broke the bond, you disrupted an ancient balance. The mansion was like a sealed container for dark energy. Now that it's fractured, that energy is leaking into the world and you're carrying part of it." Charlie stared out the window, the dark trees blurring past. "Great. So I'm a walking curse." "It's not just a curse," Elias said quietly. "It's a key. And there are people, things who would kill to use it." They pulled into the gravel driveway of a small, dilapidated cabin surrounded by thick woods. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the only sound was the chirping of crickets. Elias stepped out of the car and motioned for Charlie to follow. "This place is off the grid. We'll be safe here for a while." Charlie grabbed her bag and climbed out, glancing uneasily at the dark forest. "What do you mean by a while? How long until whoever's after me shows up?" Elias didn't answer right away. He unlocked the cabin door and ushered her inside. The space was small but functional, a single room with a bed, a table, and a wood-burning stove. "They'll find you eventually," Elias said, lighting an oil lamp. "The power inside you is like a beacon. It's only a matter of time." Charlie dropped her bag on the table and sank into a chair. "So what do we do? Just wait for them to show up and hope for the best?" "No," Elias said, pulling a thick, leather-bound book from his bag. "We prepare." He set the book on the table and opened it to a page filled with arcane symbols and diagrams. "If you want to survive, you need to learn how to control the power inside you. Otherwise, it'll tear you apart, or worse, someone else will take it from you." For the next several hours, Elias put Charlie through a crash course in harnessing her newfound abilities. At first, it felt impossible, like trying to move a muscle she didn't know she had. But as the night wore on, she began to feel it, a faint, pulsing energy deep within her, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. "Focus," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "The power is a part of you now. You don't need to force it, just guide it." Charlie closed her eyes, her hands trembling as she tried to channel the energy. A faint glow began to emanate from her fingertips, and for a moment, she felt a surge of triumph. But then the glow turned dark, twisting into shadowy tendrils that lashed out around her. The lamp flickered, and the room grew cold. "Charlie, stop!" Elias shouted. She opened her eyes, panic surging through her as she tried to pull the energy back. The tendrils vanished, and she collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Elias crouched beside her, his expression grim. "You're strong, but you're untrained. If you're not careful, the power will consume you." Charlie wiped the sweat from her brow, her hands still shaking. "What if I can't control it? What if I end up like the Watchers?" Elias's gaze softened. "You won't. You've already proven you're stronger than they ever were. But you need to trust yourself and trust the power." The attack came just before dawn. Charlie was sitting by the window, staring out at the dark forest, when she felt it, a sudden, suffocating pressure, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Elias was on his feet in an instant, grabbing a shotgun from beneath the bed. "They're here." Before Charlie could respond, the windows shattered, and a figure leapt into the room. It moved unnaturally fast, its limbs contorting as it lunged toward her. Charlie screamed, instinctively raising her hands. The power inside her surged, and a burst of light erupted from her palms, sending the figure crashing into the wall. Elias fired the shotgun, the blast echoing through the cabin. The figure dissolved into smoke, but more shapes were already closing in, their glowing eyes visible through the shattered windows. "Charlie, focus!" Elias shouted, reloading the shotgun. She took a deep breath, her heart racing as she tried to summon the energy again. This time, it came more easily, flowing through her like a river. She raised her hands, and the room was filled with a blinding light. The shadows screamed, their forms disintegrating as the light engulfed them. When the room finally went dark again, the attackers were gone, leaving only silence. Charlie slumped against the wall, her body trembling with exhaustion. "What the hell were those things?" "Hunters," Elias said, his voice tight. "Servants of something much darker. They won't stop until they have you." Charlie looked at her hands, the faint glow of the power still lingering beneath her skin. "Then I'll make sure they don't get the chance." Elias nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "Good. Because this is only the beginning." As the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, Charlie felt a renewed sense of determination. She had fought the mansion and won, but now she was facing an even greater battle. The power within her was a gift and a curse, a double-edged sword that could either destroy her or make her unstoppable. And she was determined to make it the latter. The next few days were a blur of preparation and paranoia. Charlie and Elias moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be found. Each night, they reinforced their temporary shelters with charms and sigils Elias etched into the ground, but the weight of the unseen hunters was ever present. Charlie could feel the power inside her growing, its pulse stronger with each passing hour. At times, it felt comforting, like an ally ready to protect her. But other times, it whispered to her, a seductive voice urging her to let go, to embrace its full strength. Elias noticed the change. "You're carrying more than just the mansion's legacy," he said one evening as they sat by a small campfire in the woods. "It's alive in its own way. A piece of what made the mansion so dangerous is inside you now. And it's watching." "Watching?" Charlie asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Elias nodded. "It's testing you. Waiting to see what you'll do with it." Their journey took them deep into Louisiana's bayous, a maze of winding waterways and ancient trees dripping with moss. It was in this remote landscape that they met their next unexpected ally, or so he claimed to be. They were navigating a narrow canal when their small motorboat stalled. Elias worked to restart the engine while Charlie kept a wary eye on the surrounding swamp. The stillness was unnerving, broken only by the occasional splash of unseen creatures in the water. Then, out of the fog, a figure appeared. He was tall and gaunt, his skin weathered like old leather. He stood on a small wooden pier, his piercing green eyes locked on Charlie. "You're carrying something dangerous," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. Elias tensed, his hand moving to the shotgun at his side. Who are you? The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. My name's Desmond. I've been following the mansion's history for decades. When I felt the shift, I knew I'd find you out here. Charlie frowned. You felt it? Desmond nodded. The power you carry isn't just tied to the mansion. It's part of something much older, something that shouldn't exist in this world. You've torn a hole, and now things are slipping through. What things? Charlie asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Desmond's gaze darkened. The kind of things that don't belong anywhere. They're drawn to you, Keeper. And if you're not careful, they'll use you to finish what the mansion started. Desmond offered to help, but his terms were cryptic. I can teach you to control it, but you'll have to trust me. And trust doesn't come cheap. Charlie glanced at Elias, who shook his head subtly. We don't need his help, he said firmly. Don't be so sure, Desmond countered. The hunters are the least of your problems. The real danger hasn't even shown itself yet. Charlie hesitated, torn between Elias's caution and the strange pull she felt toward Desmond. There was something about him, something unsettling but familiar. What do you want in return? She asked finally. Desmond's lips curled into a faint smile. When the time comes, you'll owe me a favor. Nothing more, nothing less. That's vague, Charlie said, narrowing her eyes. Power always comes with a price, Desmond said simply. The question is, are you willing to pay it? Charlie's decision to accept Desmond's offer came sooner than expected. That night, as they set up camp on a small island in the bayou, the hunters returned. It started with the faint sound of whispers, carried on the wind. Then came the glowing eyes in the shadows, dozens of them, circling the camp. They're testing you, Desmond said calmly, standing beside her as Elias prepared the shotgun. They want to see if you're worthy. Worthy of what? Charlie demanded, her voice trembling. Desmond didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. Focus. The power is yours to command, but only if you believe it is. The first hunter lunged from the darkness, its form a writhing mass of shadow and claws. Charlie raised her hands instinctively, and a burst of light erupted from her palms, driving the creature back. But more were coming. Elias fired the shotgun, the blast scattering another hunter, but it reformed almost instantly. There's too many, he shouted. Not if she stops holding back, Desmond said, his voice steady. Charlie closed her eyes, her heart pounding. The power inside her surged, wild and chaotic, but she reached for it, pulling it closer. She could feel the darkness in it, the sharp edge of something ancient and angry. When she opened her eyes, they glowed faintly with the same light she had seen in the mansion. Get behind me, she said, her voice firm. Elias and Desmond stepped back as Charlie unleashed the energy in a blinding wave. The hunters screamed as the light tore through them, their forms dissolving into ash. When it was over, the camp was silent. The hunters were gone, but Charlie's hands still glowed faintly, the power crackling around her like static electricity. Desmond smiled, his expression unreadable. You're stronger than I thought. Charlie turned to him, her eyes narrowing. What did you mean when you said they were testing me? Desmond's smile faded. Because they're not just hunting you, Charlie. They're hunting the Keeper. And now they know you're ready. The days following the confrontation in the bayou were marked by a tense silence. Desmond led the group deeper into the swamp, navigating a labyrinth of waterways and overgrown trails with an uncanny sense of direction. Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't simply guiding them to safety, he was leading them somewhere specific. The swamp grew darker as they traveled, the air thick with humidity and the buzzing of unseen insects. The trees closed in, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. By the time they reached their destination, the world felt entirely removed from reality. It was a clearing surrounded by ancient cypress trees, their gnarled roots rising out of the water like skeletal fingers. At the center stood a stone altar, weathered by time but still radiating an eerie presence. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, glowing faintly in the dim light. "What is this place?" Charlie asked, her voice hushed. Desmond stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the altar. "This is where it all began. The source of the power that created the mansion and the curse that bound it." Elias stood back, his arms crossed, watching Desmond with suspicion. "Why bring us here? What aren't you telling us?" Desmond didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a hand on the altar, his expression unreadable. "This is the site of the first keeper's trial. Long before the mansion, there was a temple hidden deep in this swamp. Its priests believed they could contain the darkness they discovered here. They were wrong." Charlie stepped closer, her unease growing with every word. "What happened to them?" "They became the first Watchers," Desmond said grimly. "Twisted by the power they sought to control. The Keeper was meant to be their salvation, but even she couldn't stop what they had unleashed." "Then why bring me here?" Charlie asked, her voice rising. "If the Keeper couldn't stop it back then, what makes you think I can?" Desmond turned to her, his eyes hard. "Because you're different. The Keeper's power has never been wielded by someone like you, someone who's already broken the rules." Desmond motioned for Charlie to step forward, and as she approached the altar, the glowing symbols flared brighter. She felt a pulse of energy, pulling her toward the stone. "This is the trial," Desmond said. "The altar will test your will, your strength, and your resolve. If you succeed, you'll gain full control of the Keeper's power. If you fail—" "What happens if I fail?" Charlie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Desmond's expression darkened. "Then the power will consume you and everything else around you." Elias stepped forward, his face set in determination. "She doesn't have to do this. We can find another way." "There is no other way," Desmond said sharply. "The power won't wait. It's already calling to her." Charlie hesitated, her heart pounding. The pull of the altar was growing stronger, the air around it vibrating with unseen energy. "I have to try," she said finally, her voice steady. "If I don't, this power will destroy everything. I can't let that happen." Elias opened his mouth to protest, but Charlie stepped onto the altar before he could stop her. The moment her feet touched the stone, the world shifted. The clearing vanished, replaced by a vast, empty void. Charlie stood alone in the darkness, the faint glow of the altar the only light. "Welcome, Keeper," a voice echoed around her. It was deep and resonant, filled with an ancient authority. Charlie turned, but there was no one there. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I am the essence of the power you seek to control," the voice replied. "The question is not who I am, but who you are. Are you worthy of this burden, or will you fall, like the others before you?" "I didn't ask for this," Charlie shouted. "I never wanted any of it. Yet here you are," the voice said. "You have fought to survive, to reclaim your soul. But survival is not enough. To wield this power, you must confront the truth of who you are and who you must become." The void around Charlie shifted, and she was suddenly standing in the mansion's attic. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the faint sound of chains echoed in the darkness. She turned and saw herself trapped and terrified, reliving the moment she had first encountered the Watchers. "This is where it began," the voice said. "The fear, the pain, the desperation. You cannot escape it. You must face it." The vision changed again, and Charlie saw herself standing before a mirror, her reflection warped and shadowed. The power inside her glowed like a living flame, its edges flickering with darkness. "This is who you are now," the voice continued. "A vessel of light and shadow. You cannot have one without the other. Will you accept this truth or will you let the darkness consume you? Charlie felt the weight of the voice's words pressing down on her. The power inside her pulsed, urging her to take control. But she could also feel the darkness, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for her to falter. I accept it, she said finally, her voice steady. All of it? The light, the darkness, everything. It's a part of me now, and I won't let it control me. The void trembled, and the light of the altar flared brighter. The voice was silent for a moment before it spoke again. Then you have passed the trial. But your journey is far from over, Keeper. The choices you make will shape the world and not all will survive the path you've chosen. The void dissolved, and Charlie found herself back in the clearing. Elias and Desmond stood nearby, their faces a mixture of relief and apprehension. What happened? Elias asked. Charlie stepped down from the altar, her hands glowing faintly with the power she now controlled. I passed. Desmond nodded, a hint of a smile on his lips. Then the real fight begins. The swamp felt different as they left the clearing. The air, once thick and oppressive, now buzzed with an unsettling energy. Charlie could feel the power inside her responding to the environment, as if the swamp itself was alive and aware of her presence. Elias walked beside her, his shotgun slung over one shoulder. You passed the trial, he said, his tone cautious. But what does that mean? What happens now? Charlie shook her head, her expression grim. I don't know. The voice said my choices will shape the world, but it didn't exactly come with an instruction manual. Desmond, leading the way, chuckled softly. That's the thing about power, it's not about knowing the future. It's about deciding it. Charlie frowned, uneasy with his cryptic words. You seem awfully calm for someone who claims the fate of the world is at stake. I've seen this game played before, Desmond replied without looking back. The pieces may change, but the board stays the same. The question is whether you'll be the player or the pawn. They arrived at a dilapidated shack on the edge of the swamp as night fell. It wasn't much, just 4 walls and a roof, but it was shelter. Desmond insisted it would be safe for the night, though neither Charlie nor Elias trusted him entirely. As they settled in, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows outside the shack seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, and the faint sound of whispers lingered on the edge of hearing. Elias noticed her unease. You're hearing them too, aren't you? Charlie nodded. It's like they're just out of reach, waiting for something. They're drawn to the power, Desmond said, leaning casually against the wall. Now that you've accepted it, they're testing the boundaries. And what happens if they decide to cross those boundaries? Elias asked, his grip tightening on the shotgun. Desmond's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then it'll be up to her to show them why that's a bad idea. The attack came just after midnight. The first sign was the temperature drop, the air inside the shack turned icy, and frost crept across the windows. Then came the sound of footsteps, soft and deliberate, circling the building. Elias moved to the door, his shotgun at the ready. We're not alone. Charlie stood in the center of the room, her hands glowing faintly as she reached for the power within her. They're not just testing the boundaries anymore. They're here for me. The first shadow slipped through the cracks in the walls, its form coalescing into a tall, featureless figure. More followed, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They're watchers, Desmond said calmly, his tone almost admiring. They've come to see if you're worthy of what you've taken. Didn't I already prove that? Charlie shot back, her voice tense. Not to them, Desmond replied. Elias fired the first shot, the blast scattering one of the figures into smoke. But more kept coming, their forms shifting and reforming as they closed in. Charlie raised her hands, and a wave of light erupted from her palms, pushing the shadows back. They hissed and writhed, but they didn't retreat. They're not stopping, Elias shouted, reloading the shotgun. They won't, Desmond said. Not until she gives them a reason to. Charlie's pulse thundered in her ears as the power inside her surged. The light in her hands grew brighter, but she could feel the darkness beneath it, waiting for her to falter. Enough, she shouted, her voice echoing with unnatural authority. The shadows froze, their forms flickering like candle flames. The room fell silent, the oppressive presence hanging in the air like a weight. Charlie stepped forward, her glowing hands raised. I don't know what you want from me, but I'm not afraid of you. If you think you can take this power from me, you're wrong. The largest shadow, its form towering over the others, tilted its head as if considering her words. Then it spoke, its voice a low, guttural rasp. We do not seek to take. We seek to follow. Charlie blinked, startled. Follow. You are keeper, the shadow said. The light and the dark. You command us or destroy us. Choose. The power inside her pulsed, the light and darkness intertwining. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. To command the shadows meant accepting their existence, their darkness as part of her own. To destroy them meant rejecting that darkness, but at what cost? Charlie hesitated, her mind racing. Elias stepped closer, his expression a mix of concern and resolve. Charlie, whatever you choose, I'm with you. But don't let them twist you into something you're not. Desmond watched silently, his gaze unreadable. Charlie took a deep breath, the power inside her swirling like a storm. I won't let this power control me, she said finally. But I won't deny what I've become either. She raised her hands, the light intensifying. If you'll follow me, then you follow my rules. No harm comes to the innocent. No more destruction. Do you understand? The shadows bowed, their forms flickering but solidifying slightly. As you command, Keeper. The oppressive presence lifted, and the shadows dissolved into the walls, leaving the room eerily quiet. Desmond chuckled softly. Well, that's one way to pass a test. Charlie turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly. What's next? Desmond's smile faded. Now, you prove to the world why they should follow you too. The morning came heavy with an unnatural stillness, as if the swamp itself held its breath. Charlie stood at the edge of the shack's crumbling porch, staring into the mist-draped trees. The events of the night replayed in her mind, the shadows bowing to her, the power surging within her veins, and the faint, haunting echo of their final words, as you command, Keeper. Elias emerged from the shack, his shotgun slung over his shoulder. You barely slept, he said, his voice quiet but pointed. I couldn't, Charlie replied. She flexed her fingers, the faint glow of her power still lingering beneath her skin. It's like, they're still here. Watching. Waiting. They're bound to you now, Desmond said from behind them, his tone casual. They'll follow your lead if you're strong enough to keep them in line. Charlie turned to him, her eyes narrowing. And what happens if I'm not? Desmond stepped forward, his expression turning grim. Then you'll become just like them. A shadow bound to the Keeper's curse. Before Charlie could respond, the sound of splashing water echoed through the trees. The group tensed, Elias raising his shotgun as Charlie instinctively summoned a faint orb of light into her hand. A figure stumbled into view, soaked and gasping for breath. It was a young woman, her face pale and streaked with mud. She clutched a torn piece of fabric in her hand, her eyes wide with fear. Help me, she pleaded, collapsing onto the ground. Elias was the first to reach her, helping her sit up. What happened? They're coming, she gasped. They're coming for her. Charlie's blood ran cold. For me. The woman nodded, her grip tightening on the fabric. They know what you've done. The power you've taken. They won't stop until they have it or destroy you trying. Desmond cursed under his breath. The council. Charlie turned to him, her confusion giving way to anger. The council? Who are they? A secret order, Desmond said grimly. They've existed as long as the keepers have. Their goal is simple, to control the power or eliminate anyone who wields it. Elias frowned. And let me guess, they're not the negotiating type. Not even close, Desmond replied. They've spent centuries hunting down rogue keepers and anyone who dared to defy their rules. If they're coming for Charlie, it means they see her as a threat. Because of the shadows, Charlie realized. Desmond nodded. You've broken their rules just by existing. And now they'll do whatever it takes to stop you. The group didn't have long to prepare. The council's forces arrived before noon, their approach heralded by the eerie sound of chanting that echoed through the swamp. Figures clad in dark cloaks emerged from the mist, their faces hidden beneath ornate masks. Elias and Charlie took defensive positions around the shack, while Desmond worked to draw protective wards on the ground. They'll try to overwhelm you with numbers, Desmond warned. But they won't expect the shadows. Use them. Charlie hesitated, the memory of the shadows' bowing forms flashing in her mind. What if I lose control? Then we all die, Desmond said bluntly. The first strike came without warning, a bolt of crimson energy that shattered one of the shack's walls. Charlie ducked, her heart racing as the air crackled with power. Charlie, now would be a good time to call your new friends. Elias shouted, firing his shotgun at the advancing figures. Taking a deep breath, Charlie reached for the power within her. The shadows responded immediately, rising from the ground like living smoke. They swirled around her, their forms twisting into jagged, monstrous shapes. Protect us, Charlie commanded, her voice steady. The shadows surged forward, colliding with the council's forces in a chaotic blur of light and darkness. The battle was brutal and unrelenting. The shadows fought with an animalistic ferocity, tearing through the council's ranks. But the council's members were relentless, their magic cutting through the swamp like a blade. Charlie found herself face to face with one of the masked figures, their crimson blade humming with energy. She dodged their strike, summoning a burst of light that sent them staggering backward. You don't understand what you're dealing with, the figure shouted, their voice muffled by the mask. The Keeper's power will destroy you and everything you love. Then why are you trying to kill me? Charlie shot back, the light in her hands flaring. To save the world from you, the figure replied. Before Charlie could respond, one of the shadows surged forward, striking the figure down. Charlie stared in horror as the shadow's form rippled, its edges darker and more jagged than before. They're changing, Desmond warned from across the clearing. The more they fight, the stronger and darker they become. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The remaining council members retreated into the swamp, their chants fading into the distance. Charlie stood in the clearing, her hands trembling. The shadows lingered around her, their forms flickering with an unsettling intensity. Elias approached cautiously. You okay? Charlie nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the shadows. They're not just following me. They're feeding off the fight. Desmond stepped forward, his expression grim. The more you use them, the more they'll demand. You've won this battle, but the war is far from over. As the group regrouped, the young woman who had warned them stepped forward, her expression desperate. They'll come back, she said. And next time, they'll bring their full force. You need to end this before it's too late. Charlie looked at her, then at the shadows swirling around her. The power inside her felt stronger than ever, but it also felt heavier, like a chain pulling her deeper into the darkness. I can't keep running, Charlie said finally. If the council wants a fight, I'll give them one. But I need to understand this power first. I need to know what I'm really up against. Desmond nodded. Then we'll find the answers together. But be ready, Keeper. The deeper you go, the harder it will be to come back. Charlie's jaw tightened, her resolve hardening. I don't care how dark it gets. I'm not losing myself or this fight. The swamp whispered of secrets long buried as Charlie, Elias, Desmond, and their mysterious guide trudged deeper into its murky depths. The battle with the council had left its mark not just on their battered bodies, but on Charlie's soul. The shadows that followed her had grown quieter, yet their presence loomed heavier than ever, like a weight she could no longer ignore. Where are we going? Elias asked, his voice cutting through the thick silence. The young woman, who had introduced herself as Annette, didn't break her stride. To the place where it all began, she said. If you're serious about facing the council and mastering your power, you'll need answers that only the Keeper's archives can provide. Desmond raised an eyebrow. The archives? Thought they were just a myth. They're real, Annette replied, her tone sharp. And they're guarded by those who have walked this path before. Charlie hesitated, her hand brushing against the shadows that clung to her side like loyal sentinels. More keepers? Not exactly, Annette said cryptically. They arrived at the sanctuary just as dusk painted the sky in hues of crimson and gold. Hidden within the dense foliage, the structure was a crumbling cathedral, its stone walls overtaken by vines and moss. A sense of reverence hung in the air, broken only by the faint sound of rustling leaves. This is it, Annette said, stopping at the threshold. The sanctuary of the first keeper. Charlie stepped forward, her breath catching as the air around her seemed to hum with ancient energy. Symbols etched into the stone glowed faintly as she approached, responding to her presence. Elias whistled low. This place is something else. Desmond frowned. It's more than that. It's alive. The moment Charlie crossed the threshold, a ripple of power coursed through the sanctuary. The shadows around her surged forward, intertwining with the glowing symbols on the walls. Annette stepped beside her, her expression grave. The archives will only open to a keeper. Are you ready to see the truth? Charlie's voice was steady, but her heart pounded. I don't think I have a choice. As they moved deeper into the sanctuary, the air grew colder. At the heart of the cathedral was a pedestal, its surface carved with intricate patterns. Hovering above it was a black crystal, its core pulsing faintly with light. The Keeper Stone, Annette said, her voice barely above a whisper. It holds the memories of every keeper who came before you. But it's not freely given, you must prove yourself worthy. Charlie approached the pedestal cautiously. The shadows swirled around her, their movements restless. What kind of proof are we talking about? Elias asked, his grip tightening on his shotgun. Annette gestured to the crystal. It will show her what she fears most and force her to confront it. Charlie hesitated, her mind racing with doubts. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if the darkness inside her was too much to overcome? Whatever it is, Desmond said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, face it. Don't run from it. The power chose you for a reason. Taking a deep breath, Charlie reached out and touched the crystal. The world around her shifted in an instant. She stood in the mansion's attic, but it wasn't abandoned anymore. The room was filled with flickering candlelight and the soft murmur of voices. A figure stood before her, dressed in an elegant gown stained with blood. Madame Delphine Lalaurie turned slowly, her face twisted in a grotesque smile. You've taken my place, child, Lalaurie said, her voice dripping with malice. Do you think you'll be any better? Power corrupts. It always does. Charlie backed away, her hands glowing faintly as the shadows circled her protectively. I'm nothing like you. Lalaurie laughed, a sound that echoed like shattering glass. Aren't you? Look at them. She gestured to the shadows. They're not your allies, they're your chains. You think you control them, but they'll consume you. Just as they did me. The shadows hesitated, their forms flickering. Charlie felt a pang of doubt. What if Lalaurie was right? No, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. I'm not you. I chose this power, and I'll use it to end the harm you caused. I'll make it right. The vision wavered, Lalaurie's form distorting. We'll see, she hissed before dissolving into smoke. When Charlie opened her eyes, she was back in the sanctuary. The shadows around her were steady once more, their forms solid and unyielding. The keeper stone pulsed brightly, and a stream of light shot out, forming an image in the air. It showed a network of glowing lines that spread across the world, converging at a single point. Annette's eyes widened. That's impossible. Desmond leaned closer, his expression darkening. It's the source of the Keeper's power. The Nexus. Elias frowned. And what happens if the Council gets there first? They'll destroy it, Annette said, her voice trembling. And with it, every Keeper and every shadow will cease to exist. Charlie stared at the glowing map, her resolve hardening. Then we have to stop them. The sanctuary's air hummed with tension as Charlie, Elias, Desmond, and Annette studied the glowing map. The network of lines seemed alive, shifting subtly as though urging them to move. At the center of it all, the Nexus pulsed like a heartbeat, its glow steady and ominous. Where is it? Elias asked, breaking the silence. Desmond's eyes narrowed as he traced the lines with a finger. It's deep in the mountains, isolated and hidden. No wonder the Council hasn't destroyed it already. Annette stepped forward, her voice heavy with urgency. If they've learned about this place, they'll be moving fast. The Nexus is the source of all Keeper power. If it's destroyed, the shadows won't just vanish, they'll erupt into chaos. Every living Keeper will lose control, and the darkness will consume them. Charlie shivered. The shadows around her flickered, sensing her unease. Then we don't have a choice. We have to get there before they do. The swamp's oppressive mist gave way to a harsh, rocky landscape as they began their trek toward the Nexus. The journey wasn't just physically demanding, it was emotionally exhausting. Each step felt like a weight on Charlie's shoulders, the burden of her newfound power growing heavier with every mile. Desmond walked beside her, his usual cocky demeanor subdued. You okay? He asked. Charlie nodded but didn't meet his gaze. I have to be. You don't have to carry it alone, you know, he said. We're in this together. She glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Thanks, she said quietly. Behind them, Elias and Annette exchanged wary glances. You think she can handle it? Elias asked in a low voice. She doesn't have a choice, Annette replied. But she's stronger than she knows. As night fell, they set up camp in a narrow canyon. The shadows seemed to grow restless in the dark, their movements erratic and unpredictable. Charlie sat by the fire, watching them with a mixture of fascination and fear. I see why you're scared of them, Elias said, sitting down beside her. Charlie glanced at him. They're part of me now, but I still don't understand them. What if they take over? Elias shrugged. Then don't let them. You've already proven you can control them, Lalaurie couldn't. That's the difference. Their conversation was interrupted by a low growl echoing through the canyon. The group jumped to their feet, weapons drawn as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was an older man, his face lined with age and hardship. He carried a staff carved with intricate runes and wore a tattered cloak that shimmered faintly in the firelight. You carry the Keeper's mark, he said, his voice deep and resonant. I've been waiting for you. The man introduced himself as Oren, a former Keeper who had forsaken the power after witnessing its corrupting influence. The Nexus is not just a source of power, it's a prison, he explained. It holds the darkness in check, but only as long as the Keepers remain balanced. What happens if it's destroyed? Charlie asked. Oren's expression darkened. The balance will shatter. The shadows will escape, untethered, and the world will drown in chaos. Annette frowned. Then why would the council want to destroy it? They believe they can create a new order, one without keepers or shadows, Oren said. But they're wrong. The Nexus isn't just the source of keeper power, it's tied to the very fabric of existence. Charlie's resolve hardened. Then we have to stop them. Oren studied her for a long moment. You carry the weight of the shadows, yet you've retained your humanity. That is rare. But the Nexus will test you in ways you can't imagine. Are you prepared to face the truth of what you've become? I don't have a choice, Charlie said. There is always a choice, Oren said. But every choice has a cost. The group reached the Nexus at dawn. The mountains opened into a vast cavern, its walls glowing with the same pulsating energy as the map. At the center of the chamber was a massive crystal, its surface etched with ancient symbols. But they weren't alone. The council was already there, their forces gathered in a semicircle around the crystal. At their center stood a figure in a crimson robe, their face obscured by a mask. Keeper, the figure called, their voice echoing in the cavern. You're too late. The Nexus will fall, and with it, your reign of shadows. Charlie stepped forward, the shadows rising around her like a storm. I'm not here to reign, I'm here to end this. And I won't let you destroy the world to do it. The masked figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You still don't understand, do you? The Nexus isn't just the source of power, it's a curse. The only way to free yourself is to destroy it. Charlie hesitated, doubt creeping in. What if they were right? What if destroying the Nexus was the only way to break the cycle? Don't listen to them, Oren said, his voice steady. They only want to replace the curse with their own rule. The cavern erupted into chaos as the council attacked. Charlie summoned the shadows, their power surging through her as she fought to protect the Nexus. But as the battle raged, the crystal began to crack, its light flickering. The Nexus was failing, and with it, the balance of the world. The cavern trembled under the weight of the Nexus's growing instability. Shards of energy crackled in the air, fracturing the dim light and casting jagged shadows across the chamber. Charlie stood at the center of it all, her chest heaving as the shadows around her swirled like a storm. Elias and Desmond fought furiously against the council's forces, their shouts mingling with the echoing booms of magical attacks. Oren, his staff glowing with ancient power, chanted incantations to stabilize the Nexus's energy. But it was Annette who caught Charlie's eye, her expression tied with fear and resolve as she guarded the crystal. And then, the masked leader stepped forward. You feel it, don't you? They said, their voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. The Nexus is dying. Its power is poisoning you just as it poisoned every keeper before you. This is your chance to end it. To free yourself. Charlie gritted her teeth, her hands curling into fists. The shadows around her flickered, uncertain. And replace it with what? Your rule? Your control? The figure laughed coldly. Do you think you control the shadows? They control you. The Nexus binds you to them, just as it binds this world to its fragile balance. Break the Nexus, and you'll break that chain. Isn't that what you've wanted all along? The cavern shifted, and suddenly, Charlie was no longer standing in the chamber. The world around her blurred, dissolving into a vision. She was back in the attic of the Lalaurie mansion, surrounded by ghostly figures. The shadows, her constant companions, loomed larger than ever, their forms almost human. One shadow stepped forward, its voice a low, mournful whisper. We were once like you. Keepers of balance. Protectors of the Nexus. What happened to you? Charlie asked, her voice trembling. We gave too much, the shadow replied. The Nexus demands sacrifice. The longer you wield its power, the more it takes. Your soul, your mind, until nothing of you remains. Charlie staggered back, her chest tightening. That's not true. I can control it. I've been controlling it. For now, the shadow said. But the nexus is failing. Its destruction will sever the chain, but it will also unleash the darkness. The vision shattered, and Charlie was back in the cavern. The masked leader stood across from her, their hand outstretched toward the nexus. A pulse of energy rippled through the room as cracks spread across the crystal. You've seen it, the leader said. You know the truth now. The nexus doesn't just bind the shadows, it binds you. Break it, and you'll be free. Keep it, and you'll lose yourself. Don't listen to them. Oren shouted, his voice straining against the roar of the collapsing chamber. The nexus isn't a curse, it's a choice. Every keeper has made it, and so must you. But destroying it will doom us all. Charlie's heart pounded. The shadows writhed around her, their loyalty unwavering. But she could feel the truth in the masked leader's words. The nexus was taking from her piece by piece. Charlie! Elias shouted, his voice breaking through her haze. Whatever you do, we're with you. Just decide. The nexus pulsed again, and Charlie knew she had seconds to act. She glanced at her friends, at Elias's unwavering faith, Desmond's guarded determination, and Annette's fierce loyalty. They had fought for her, believed in her. Could she let that all be for nothing? Her gaze shifted to the masked leader. Their calm demeanor belied their desperation, but their words carried weight. Could she trust them? The shadows grew restless, sensing her inner turmoil. She could feel their pull, their hunger for balance or for chaos. Taking a deep breath, Charlie stepped forward. I won't let the world fall, she said, her voice steady. But I won't let this power destroy me either. With a flick of her wrist, the shadows surged toward the nexus, wrapping around the crystal like a cocoon. The energy within it flared brightly, threatening to explode, but Charlie held firm, her will anchoring the shadows in place. You can't stop it, the masked leader shouted. I'm not stopping it, Charlie said. I'm remaking it. The nexus erupted in a burst of light, flooding the cavern with an otherworldly glow. For a moment, everything was silent. When the light faded, Charlie stood alone in the center of the chamber. The nexus was no longer a crystal, it had transformed into a glowing orb, pulsing softly with a steady rhythm. The shadows around her had changed as well, their forms more defined, more human. Elias, Desmond, and Annette stared in awe, while Oren stepped forward, his expression unreadable. You did it, he said. You stabilized the nexus. But at what cost? Charlie didn't respond. The shadows within her felt different. Stronger, yet calmer. The masked leader, now unmasked, lay unconscious at the edge of the chamber. Charlie approached them, her voice soft but firm. This isn't over. The nexus has changed, and so have I. But if you try to destroy it again, I won't hold back. She turned to her friends, her resolve clear. We need to prepare. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together.